In this week's tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how you can get a distressed look on your images by using a grunge brush. And you can find several free grunge brushes on the net just by typing in your Google browser, Photoshop grunge brushes, and you'll be able to find a whole host of grunge brushes that you'll be able to use on your images. The image that we're going to be using in today's tutorial comes to us from iStockPhoto, and we'd like to thank them for contributing this image to this podcast. So the first thing that I'm going to do is come into Photoshop, and you can see the various layers that I've created here, and I'm going to go ahead and turn them off. Now, as far as our original image goes, what I've done is I've created a curves adjustment, and then I've created a layer mask just to give the image a little bit more contrast. Now, I'm not going to throw these layers away right at the moment. We'll go ahead and preserve those, but they are turned off, and we'll be able to come back to them later on if we like. What I'm going to do is right above the curves layer here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new layer just by clicking here on the create a new layer icon at the bottom of the layers palette. And when I do, you'll see the new layer appear. Next, what I'm going to want to do is select my brush from my tools palette, and I'll just select it here. I could hit the B key on the keyboard, or I could go ahead and click on the brush tool. And by the way, if you look at the various tools and in the lower right hand corner you see a little triangle, that means that there are other tools beneath the tool you're looking at. So if I click and hold my mouse, you can see also we've got the pencil tool and the color replacement tool. But for this tutorial, we want to use the brush tool, and I'm going to go ahead and select that. The next step, I want to come over here to the newly created layer that I created, and I want to make sure that I select the blend mode of soft light. We'll be able to play around with overlay and some of the other lighting effects or blending modes later on, but let's go ahead and start out with soft light. And of course, nothing is going to change yet because we haven't painted any of the effects on our image. Also, down in the color swatches panel, I want to make sure that my foreground is black. Then with the brush tool selected, I'm going to come up to my brushes palette, and I'm going to go ahead and pick a brush. I actually already have a brush selected from when I did this tutorial prior to doing the podcast, and I selected this number 300 here brush. And once you have that selected, you can go ahead and just click off of the image, and that'll make your brushes palette disappear. Now, the brush that we have on the screen, you can kind of see it here and get a little bit of an idea of what the pattern looks like. But one thing to remember is you can really change around the way a brush looks and acts by just coming up here to the brushes panel. And I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and we can look at, for instance, shape dynamics. And if I click on shape dynamics, you'll be able to see really what this grunge brush is looking like. Now, I can change the size of the jitter. I can bring this in, or I can expand it out. I can change the roundness of the jitter. I can change the jitter angle. There's a lot of things that I can do and manipulate my brushes. And so I'm just pointing this out to you that I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of adjustments to the brush I'm going to be using today, but you can come in and get a whole lot of other really cool effects by coming into this brushes palette. I can even change the scattering, and this will allow the brush to be spread out even more, and I can change the count of the number of actual brush strokes that will be put in there. So brushes are a great way to go in and start experimenting with and actually changing them around to get different looks and effects. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out just by clicking here. And one of the things that I want to do is expand the size of this brush. I really want to get it to the size that it's going to start covering the entire image. So I'm going to use the bracket keys, and I'm going to use the right bracket key, and as I do, you can start seeing this brush expand. I'm going to expand it about to the size of the image, and then I'm going to go ahead and click once and click again and click, and drag just a little bit and move things around and start distressing this image. Then I might come up here and I might grab another grunge brush that I've loaded and bring it in. Again, I'll expand it out just a little bit, and I might just treat some of these other areas. And basically you can see that we're able to begin distressing our images just by using the grunge brush. Now, if the effect is a little bit strong for you, don't forget that you can always come up here in the layers palette and lower the opacity of the brush strokes that you created. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to dial these brush strokes down to maybe about 40%. You can also experiment with some of the blend modes. You can go into overlay mode to see if that's creating an effect you want, or play around with some of the other blend modes. I typically use soft light, and I'm going to be using that here for this image. Also, don't forget that you can put a layer mask on this layer and you can paint out any areas that might have been affected or blend in other areas that were affected by the grunge brush. I'll just come down here to the bottom of the layers palette and add a layer mask to this newly created layer here. And I want to grab my brush, but I don't want to be painting with a grunge brush. I just want to be painting with one of these softer brushes here. I'll hit the escape key to close the brush here. And I'm going to be painting with this brush. Now we want to paint with black because we want to kind of hide some of this area. The other thing that you might want to consider doing as you're blending out some of the stronger marks in some of the more important areas is just to change your opacity mode. You don't really want to eliminate things altogether, or you're going to have some pretty big gaping holes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the opacity of my brush. And I'll just click right here, and I think I'm going to lower the opacity to somewhere around 30% to begin with. Now, just because the opacity is at 30%, if I continue painting on an effect, it will compound that paint stroke. And I'll show you here. For instance, I want to remove or minimize some of this area up here. So I'm going to just click and start minimizing some of that area. I don't want to necessarily take it all away. Also around his face here, I just want to kind of clean up just a couple of these strokes. Now, if this isn't enough, just continue to paint over those areas and things will gently be eliminated. Again, if I had this at 100%, and by the way, you can use the keyboard strokes to change your opacity. So if I wanted to come from 30% to 100, I would hit the 0 key. If I hit the 1 key, that would put me at 10%, and that's not what I'm looking for. But now watch what happens when I use 100% opacity, and it just starts wiping the effect completely away. This may be what you want, but then you're starting to take away a lot of that grunge effect that you were creating to begin with. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get rid of this mask. I actually like the way that things are, and I want to do one further enhancement to this image. But before I enhance the image, let's turn this layer off, and let's turn a layer on that I did with a completely different grunge brush. And so you can see all the various effects that you're going to be able to get with your images by using these grunge brushes. And also don't forget, you can use multiple grunge brushes. You don't have to just use one brush on your image. But what I want to do is I want to make a composite image. I want to create an image from these three layers. And if you'll recall from one of our previous podcasts, we're going to be doing this by holding the Shift, Control, Alt, and the E key down. And that's going to take basically a snapshot, and it's going to contain all of the visible layers beneath layer number 2 here. And then finally, what I want to do is I'm going to come up to the window menu, and I'm going to drop down to the actions palette. And from there, I'm going to select out of the TDPC action set number 2. Let's come down and let's try the warm intense, and I'm going to run that. And that's just going to intensify now our image. And once again, if it's a little bit overpowering, you can always bring that opacity down just a little bit. So as you can see, you can have a lot of fun with grunge brushes to kind of dirty up some of those images. And once again, also, don't forget there's lots and lots of free grunge brushes out there on the internet. Just pull up your browser and search in Google under Photoshop grunge brushes, and you'll quickly be able to find all of the resources to be able to download and import those brushes into Photoshop.